Tēnei te mihi kia koutou. It's an honour to be here. Big mihi to EDS for putting all this together. Gary, Sasha and Raywin for the opportunity to come up here and show some of my footage and some of other people's footage that's been fed in to paint a bit of a picture as to what's really happening out there to our landscapes, to our biodiversity, to our shared spaces. A little bit about me. I'm a passionate photographer, and I see photography and film or video as one of the the second best way to get people engaged into what's happening to our biodiversity, and second best to actually taking people out there and showing them. And I see the people in the room here, especially the ones that are still here after 3 days. We identify ourselves as people of this country, of New Zealand, of Aotearoa. We have a deep sense of identity to our biodiversity and to our beautiful landscapes. And I just wanted to put that with you while you're watching the things that I'm about to show, because our sense of identity isn't just fluffy birds and beautiful reptiles and amazing forests. There's also a lot of things that are going unnoticed. And to quote Raywin from earlier on, said much of the damage goes unobserved and the public know little about the impact. So it's a little bit of weight off my shoulders to share this with you today.
Show it on the screen down here as well, please.
Yeah, so I'm from a place called Ecological, which is just north Auckland. There's a beautiful estuary there, which is protected under the Marine Reserves Act. It's part of the Long Bay Ecological Marine Reserve. This is what has happened after almost 30 years of no fishing. We've got the mullet have come back in a big way. It's pretty hard to see this kind of footage anywhere really in the world. So it's just so special that we have it on our backyard, and you can see a kingfish chasing the mullet around there. We've got a lot of stingray. The orcas come and visit quite often. You can see a couple of young orcas learning how to hunt stingray and eat their livers. Over the years, we've watched this marine reserve get quite heavily degraded. This was the last catchment in the Hauriki Gulf called Karapiro Bay, Waiti catchment. 150 houses got put in here, and the council continued to grant winter works consent, even though we were getting these major rain events and massive amount of mud was flying into the bay. So the sediment ponds, which were, you had to have sediment ponds, they were put in, but they overflowed, so the developer filled up the wetland, blocked an intertidal stream, and used the wetland as the holding pond. And what happens when that overflows? It all flowed out into Karapiro Stream, which was one of the best kept for the Hauriki Gulf. And you can see it flying out into the bay there, where it ends up causing all sorts of problems, not just in the bay, but where it washes out to. Again, here you can see the pollution. Now, this was a sandy bottom. It very quickly has turned into a high level of mud. There's a little crab trying to go about his day. It was quite sad to see this happen, and I know it's happened in the past, but that mud's still there, and we're still seeing so much fine sediment entering the Hauriki Gulf. As Auckland expands, as industry are allowed to self-regulate, and the council compliance and monitoring just isn't there, we're seeing these impacts. This is a cockle die-off. We lost about 30 acres of cockles. A kuaka, when they turn up from Siberia, the population we've been monitoring for 10 years is halved because the food's just not there anymore. So this is another big scale thing. It's a landfill, which was a clean fill. Under the unitary plan was turned into a managed fill. They're allowed contaminants. They test 1 out of 100 trucks themselves. Not very transparent. This bush was supposed to be protected. Then they just kept getting their consent renewed and all the conditions scratched off it. And we've seen a lot of sediment come off this landfill, this managed fill, as well as when we test, we get high levels of arsenic and cadmium going into the marine reserve. You can see here they're actually bypassing one of the sediment ponds. Yeah, it is a worry, but there's big sites in Auckland and Tamaki Makaurau, and then there's small-scale sites. So this is an example of a large-scale site where it's relatively easy to get on top of. The smaller-scale sites are housing developments, small areas, And there's a major problem going on with the rush to build more and more houses. And where do you put all the dirt that you clear off these sections when you're intensifying the housing landscape? It all ends up going into the rural countryside living properties. Under the unitary plan, the amount of fill you're allowed to dump in your backyard was 200 cubic metres per year. That got turned into 1,000 cubic metres per year. And there's no monitoring, or it's just too hard for council to go and look at. They don't hand out prosecutions very much at all, really. This is some land bankers using their SNA, one of the significant ecological areas, as a tip. Started washing away their driveway, but they weren't concerned. They carried on. 3 times they were told off, a little bit of a slap on the hand from Auckland Council, and they just carry on. Where does all that sediment go? Where does all that soil go? It all goes down, clogged up the stream, which ends up in the marine reserve. This is happening across Auckland, all over the show. I'm just picking on a marine reserve because, supposedly you're not supposed to allow pollutants to go into marine reserve. Sediment is a known pollutant. Also a bit of rubbish in there. Yeah, so this was taken about a month ago. That's the Okura Marine Reserve in the background. It's just another example. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of truckloads of clay turned up here. They buried a gully, buried a whole lot of native bush. And yeah, I mean, it's just continuation, and I'd love to see a change to it, but you make phone calls, you call the council, they don't have the ability to follow it up. Which it is bizarre. You think that if they could fine and prosecute, maybe they'd have more money to get in there, but it feels like there's no will. They'd much rather take the housing development and write off the Aotearoa Gulf than stop it. So this is these guys' attempt of putting a sediment trap in. It's just plastic pollution. And I think this is one of the final clips, but this is flowing into the Lucas Creek, which is quite well known up near the Albany area. Just another example, bit of clay, no sediment nets, no worries for the developer. Yeah, so sediment pollution is a big worry for me because it goes unseen and people don't really know about it. Here's a tuna in the Vaughan stream, which is in the Long Bay Okura Marine Reserve, coming off the big Todd property development. I was trying to get a bit of clean water. And it all, ends up in our estuaries. This is Aotearoa Beach after a rain event with the subdivision up the catchment. That's the Nukamea stream. It was a stronghold for banded kakapo. And, such a beautiful beach used by so many people, just cakes of mud all over it. Now, positive, this is a recovering mussel bed. This is what we need to promote. We need these in the Aotearoa Gulf to filter, and this is what ends up when you get a little bit of sediment going into that environment. It chokes out our filter feeders, and it leaves the bottom really muddy, and only really crabs and a couple of worms can survive. Yeah, so the last of the few mussels at that site, and there's Sean with his elbow deep in silt. Now, if the council was serious about it, they'd jump on Facebook and have a look at these ads that are running all the time. This guy's filling gullies, removing coarse reed areas. You can see this one operator has a whole lot of trucks going full time, getting rid of clay for free. So production forestry, obviously that's popped up a few times over the conference, but just wanted to post a few scenes. These aren't new to anyone, what's happened on the East Coast. This was a scene out of Thames. Whole lot of sediment going into the Aotearoa Gulf from a forestry block up the way. It's pretty catastrophic. It's what, thick clay. Yeah, it was right the way up the coast. Now this was taken in June, aerial shot of or satellite shot, and you can see sediment here, coming out of the sounds from the forestry down the coast. And I think these are Hawke's Bay photos being sent in, lack of erosion and sediment control on forestry roads and landings. It's just, again, continuous. Right, Cyclone Bowler, what we learned from that was, well, there were some sites on the coast where you could see these sponge forest communities and what 1 millimetre of fine sediment can wipe out something that we know little about. Okay, can I see a show of hands if anyone knows what intensive winter grazing is? Wow. Also referred to as mud farming. Now, for those of you that don't know what it is, it's a practice used because we've got too many animals and not enough land. So in the winter months, they move to areas where there's rich amount of feed, so they don't end up pugging up the whole landscape. They sort of condense it into one area, and they're given a couple of metres or a bit of strip as the electric fence moves a day. They get to eat the crop. So here's a pregnant mother, heavy in calf, trying to make her way down the hill. Here's another hapu cow trying to make her way over to the water trough. I started doing this because of the environmental pollution that I see, but you just can't look past these animal welfare issues, and I've left a whole lot of them out, like the cows having to birth into deep mud. I don't really have any words for it. Like this, going back to our sense of identity, like this is our identity now. We can pretend it isn't, but this is what we are. This is what we are as a nation. I think mud farming's cruel, and I think we should end the practice. This is washing into. That one was washing into Lake Wanaka. But so these are ephemeral streams or critical source areas. They plant crop through the paddock when it rains. That pollution ends up washing downward, and you'd be a fool to think that the animals in some cases have sort of been neglected out the back paddock and don't have the best conditions, and they're forced to drink their own waste. And then you've got the problem of all the sediment and runoff and sort of bacteria water going into our estuaries and going into our wetlands and rivers. I'm quite privileged to be in a position where I can share these images that people send through and not feel compromised for the work that I'm in. This is on the Matota River. It was a world-renowned river for fly fishing, and seeing sediment go into it. This is on the Catlins. This wasn't intensive crop. It was just grass strip-fed with sheep. And that's what happens months after the animals are taken off the crop. The grass doesn't grow back overnight. You've got 2 or 3 months of just when it does rain, if it rains, which isn't unusual in winter. Massive amount of mud flying off the hills. And I probably wouldn't have put this clip in because it was taken last year, but they've planted out the whole place in crop, so it's going to be even more intensive this year when it rains. Now, I probably wouldn't have put this one in either, but this is an organic farm. This photo was taken 2 years ago. Is anyone here that still drinks organic milk and thinks that that's sort of somehow a little bit better? Nope. This is in the Tiano. This is just south of Lake Tiano. Lots of critical source areas that are planted out. So where there's bits of depression in the paddocks, when it rains, those become streams essentially, ephemeral streams. And the runoff all ends up in the Waio River. Yeah. As we pan up, you can see the farm, the wintering farm. And look at all those critical source areas. This is taken about a month ago. There wasn't a plume because we were 5 or 10 mil under the amount of rain would have been required for these streams to start flowing. But when they do, they flow into the river. This is up in Paradise. More ephemeral streams. You can see there these streams flowing through a paddock. This is one of our farms, your and my farms, Pamu Land Corp. There's a dead deer there, and they're drinking out of the ephemeral stream. And then with enough rainfall, the mud all washes out over into the neighbouring paddocks and down the main road. As you can see, it's all ending up in the wetland, and then that goes into the Mararoa River. Here's another palmu farm. This is one of our farms. They've cropped the same area this year. We're going to see the same result. This is up at the Kiwi burn. It doesn't look like heavy sediment, but probably an hour prior to the filming, that would have been chocker. Lake Wakatipu, that's not from like crop grazing, but that one was just from traditional farming impacts. This one's taken, I think, about 2 months ago or 6 weeks ago. This is on the road to Milford Sound, and you can see, we call it the Ecoside farm because he's just drained 2 massive wetlands, and the runoff from the sheep-intensive winter grazing farms is all running into the wetlands, going into the Eglinton River, which is ending up in Lake Te Anau, where you'll never get it out. It's phosphorus-loaded sediment. There's this big wetland drain, like canal that's been dug. Yeah, and same farm. He had 800 hectares of native bush that got sprayed, bulldozed, and then burnt. I hear a lot of talk that we're on the right track, and things are getting better, but I don't see it. I just see ecocide across the whole landscape. Death by 1,000 cuts everywhere you look, little wetlands being removed. And this is for everyone to see. This is on the Milford Road. Like, Environment Southland, Dock, drive past those wetlands, those drained wetlands weekly or daily. Yeah. The Upper Taieri River, Central Otago. What a beautiful part of our country. Now this scroll plain's actively being grazed. You can see some fences in there. There's animals throughout the whole thing. And then on the sides, as you start going down the scrolls, more and more intensive farming. There's an intensive deer, or was a winter grazing, a mud farm for deer. And then the irrigation starts in a big way, and as you go further down, the scrolls kind of disappear and being sucked dry, and you end up with this disgusting water all over the show. And that's right up the top of the catchment, before the major intensity. Now this is down the south coast. This is what David Parker was referring to yesterday. If we could catch flounder in there, surely we've done our job. And he's dead right. There's a lot of changes that need to be made. Look at that thick plume coming out of what was once known as the mighty Waio River. Yep, up the back of Wanaka there. This is sediment flowing into Lake Wanaka from mud farming. Then I've thrown a few sediment shots in because they're there. Just kind of get a feel for it. That's off a Landcorp farm, one of our farms. Yeah, and then it all ends up in our estuaries. This is down in the New River estuary, thick mud. I'll never forget the smell of that mud. I'm glad I didn't touch it on my body. Yeah. This is, I think, last week this is taken. This is Lake Ellesmere, Lake Waihora, flying out into the sea. And this green algae is a result of lots of sediment going into a lake with phosphorus bound to it and algal blooms forming. There's a poor seal plant hanging out on the beach there. And then you got our hector dolphins feeding or coming up into that water because that's what they've done for eons. And if the medical officer of health is saying don't touch these algal blooms with your skin, what happens to the infant dolphins that have to swim in this? Like everything that you've seen here is a result of industry self-management and weak oversight. Right, a little bit off, more sort of focused on biodiversity, but nonetheless, forest collapse does lead to sediment pollution. We've seen it in the Raukumara ranges. So, not enough possum, not enough deer, not enough goat control. I think less than 10% of our dockland of native forest cover has got some form of some form of predator control. These big plumes going out on the east coast. I mean, it's probably not news to anyone in the room here of what happened to the documenters, but it's the same as happening up north. We just don't have the deer, but these are shots from up in Northland. This is a tortilla tree, could be 400 years old. It's been, I call it forest bleaching. That tree's had all its new shoots year after year eaten by possums. This is in the Waipawa forest, like one of our national treasures. It hasn't had a 1080 drop for 10 years. DOCA have been completely asleep at the wheel. How can we let these forests die on our watch? This is potentially a 700-year-old tortilla tree. And I don't think that tree will make it through another season. This is a rata tree just hanging on. Most of the rata got wiped out before the first 1080 drop. It's had 2 drops, it's overdue by about 7 years, so there's a few leaves left on that rata. There's a dead tortilla. And by prolonging it and not doing 1080, you lose, each time you skip 1 year, you lose hundreds of years worth of growth. This is the kohikoi. They should be flowering, they should be fruiting. That's what the fruit looks like. It's a really important fruit for birds. And the canopy in the Waipawa has just been thrashed right back. The trees are struggling to produce the last of their leaves. And if you look at the tops of most of the canopy species here, they're all about to collapse. Up the back of Paradise, cattle and deer in the native bush. And we do get plumes here, but they're definitely exacerbated by not having the vegetation there in the catchment to keep the water in. When you get big rain events, you get big blowouts, and it doesn't help with sediment. That's Diamond Lake. Yeah, that's pretty much, yeah. I just wanted to say a big thank you to the people that support me. There's a few in the room. I go about this mostly on the skin of my own back, so yeah, just wanted to say a big thanks to that. And I did have one last thing. If you weren't familiar with the feedlots in Ashburton, you are now. They're a disgrace.